The greatness of God is once again a reality for you and for me, not for us to use the way we want, according to our whims, according to our pride, but for us to know, for us to realize as we live by faith in Christ.
Welcome to this week's quick reminder from the His Hill podcast. Last week we started a series from Isaiah chapter 40. And these episodes are excerpts from a class I taught at Timberline Lodge, one of our Torchbearers centers in Colorado. The chapter begins with God saying, "Comfort, oh comfort my people." And last week we saw that God's comfort is realized through his victory, and that victory is made known to us in Christ. In this episode, we find that God's comfort is also revealed by his greatness, and we'll see that he also makes this a reality for you and me through his Son, Jesus Christ. So let's start this reminder in verse 12.
So we go on and we find out this deliverance that brings comfort. The comfort comes in that warfare and iniquity are ended, and also it comes in that we are brought into a realization of God's greatness. Look back in our chapter, verse 40, our chapter 40, beginning in verse 12. I'm going to read 12 to 17, and then we're going to go back and take chunks out of it. But I'll just read it through 12 to 17. This is the reality of the comfort of God. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens by the span, and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighed the mountains in a balance, and the hills in a pair of scales? Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, he lifts up the islands like fine dust. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn. Lebanon was known for its trees, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. So within those great forests would be many animals, but not enough. All the nations are as nothing before him. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless or void. So what do we find here? In this comfort that is known from God, there is the reality of the greatness of God and how great he is in these verses. Are you and I supposed to know the greatness of God? If you'll remember, and you probably don't because there's been a lot thrown at you, but in the beginning of the week, we looked at Colossians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. I was giving my testimony, and it was those passages that the Lord used to wake me up to the life of grace, the life that I had been given in Christ. And the words of those two verses go like this: for in him all the fullness of God dwells in bodily form, and in him you have been made complete. And he is the head of all rule and authority. We find all of God in all of Christ who lives in us. So all that is true of God is found to be true of us, but isn't that the way it's supposed to be? Because we were created in his image. The only way the image of God can be seen in us is if the image of God was living out of us. And so God has made it possible once again for the image of God to live out of us, to live out of you. When Jesus says, when you see me, you see the Father, he's saying you see the image of God. And so if Jesus, who is the image of God, lives in you, then the image of God is once again seen in man. The greatness of God is once again a reality for you and for me, not for us to use the way we want, according to our whims, according to our pride, but for us to know, for us to realize as we live by faith in Christ. The greatness of God is a reality for you who live by faith. Hebrews chapter 11 says, without faith it's impossible to please him. And the only thing that's going to please him is his image. So by faith, his image is a reality in us through Christ. The greatness of God. My dad, when I was growing up, my dad was an entrepreneur, and he owned several businesses. And I had a lot of benefit because of that. He owned a hardware store, and I would work in that hardware store sometimes. I remember when I was just a new worker there. There were 4 or 5 other clerks that were working in the hardware store that day. My dad wasn't there. And all these other clerks had way more experience, years of experience. And I had just started. A delivery truck came, big semi-truck pulled into the front. And the driver gets out, comes inside, and I'm standing behind all the other clerks. The driver comes in and he asks the question, where do you want me to put it? And every clerk turned around and looked at me. And every one of them knew I didn't know. Didn't matter, because I was the boss's son. My dad was, and I'm cautious with this because I don't want it to sound like, oh boy, look what kind of family I had. But anyway, my dad had some influence at the bank, and this is not a good thing. But my brother and I had our own bank accounts, and we would regularly, in high school, especially my brother, overdraw at the bank. We would write hot checks. We didn't know they were hot. We just didn't pay attention to the balance. And the way the bank handled it, because we were Phil's sons, the bank would call my mom and say, Miss Marie, Kelly overdrew again. And my mom would say, just transfer some money out of our account and thank you, I'm so sorry. And then we'd come home and then we would be sorry. But this was, and my brother was way bad. He was way worse at it than I was. But the benefit that was ours because we were my dad's sons. Not because of anything that we had achieved. As a matter of fact, we were stinkers with some of it. But regardless of that, the reality of being his remained. And the benefit of being his remained. Now, if we abused it, my mom and dad dealt with that. My brother, when he came on staff at His Hill, he was so used to this privilege at the bank that he overdrew at the bank one time. And he got a statement. When he got his statement, he saw that he was penalized for overdrawing. And he got mad about that. So he got in the truck and he drove down to the bank and he went up to him and he said, "What are you doing?" And they explained to him that this is how everybody else lives. And for the first time in his life, he realized you can't do that. He was no longer under his dad's protection. See, now, you can take that, and I know that's not a great example because we were wrong. But you can take that and you go, you know what? How often are we wrong as children of God, as heirs with Christ? Yet grace is still ours. He deals with it when we abuse it, but he doesn't take it away. This is the reality of our comfort.
It seems to be so easy for us to take our eyes off of Jesus when we find ourselves in trying times. It's during these times we feel helpless and hopeless. But shouldn't that be the case when we're overwhelmed by our circumstances and not the greatness of God? It's only as we fix our eyes on Jesus, as we look away from all else exclusively to Him, that we find ourselves in the proper position to see the greatness of God and know His comfort. My name is Kelly Doherty, and this has been a quick reminder of the His Hill podcast. Make sure to listen in on Thursday for our longer episode. This week, I interview one of our guest lecturers who is a dear brother from India. We can't use his name for security reasons, as there are those in his country who would like to see him die for his faith in Christ. Join us as he shares his views on the state of the Western Church. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do so by email, and that address is Kelly, Kelly, @hishill.org. Thanks for listening, and remember, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus.